want to go out and like really, really do something.
I say it, I say it again. You've been had. You've been took. You've been hoodwinked. Bamboozled.
It's a celebration, fellas. Salute.
Always do the right thing.
That's it?
That's it.
I got it. I'm gone.
The way of the future.
The way of the future.
The way of the future.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome in to Duel of the Greats, Season 2, Episode 3. Folks, got a fantastic line for you this week, and this will be our first true theme week. The theme, of course, being Paranoia, where we will compare and contrast Taxi Driver from Martin Scorsese with Summer of Sam from Spike Lee. Now, a couple kind of interesting things to kick us off. First of all, like I said, first kind of true theme week. You know, the first episode of every season so far. We've just done the first movies, which thematically they may or may not align. Which actually we've had 2 seasons in a row where they've aligned more than we realized. But you know, it wasn't necessarily a theme that we picked to look at for those 2 specific movies together. And then the second week, similar deal where it was just their best movies. Not necessarily movies that had any sort of theme we were trying to compare against. So this is the first week that we get into really start diving into the themes. And like I said, we've got Paranoia and a Taxi Driver from Martin Scorsese, Summer of Sam from Spike Lee. An interesting thing about these movies, especially that I've noticed when rewatching them, is they're a little bit, for both filmmakers, they feel a little bit sort of like little deviations from their path. It's just a little bit different than what both the filmmakers had made to that point and really since for both of them. So they've kind of deviated little bits here and there from their paths. Scorsese, you typically think of the New York gangster movie type thing, and he has movies, of course, that don't align with that, but this is one that even outside of that, it feels a little bit different, and same with Spike Lee. It just feels a little bit different from that. But for these are movies that I had seen before, and now that after rewatching Summer of Sam, I don't actually know that I had seen the full thing. So I will say that I don't know if I had seen the full thing, at least not in one sitting before. But Taxi Driver I had seen. The first time I ever watched it was back in college, and it's interesting, especially with this kind of experiment we've done with this podcast, especially for movies that I haven't seen in a while. Like last year, Jurassic Park. It's like I watched that movie like multiple times a year, right? It's either on TV or we just feel like watching it in our family. It's like a comfort movie for us and our family because our daughter can watch it, and she's old enough now, she doesn't get scared, etc. But movies like that, that I kind of continually refresh my thoughts on, are a little bit different than movies that I haven't seen in a while, sometimes in decades. And I haven't seen either of these movies in decades. So it was really interesting to see how they hit, and they both very much hit differently than I remember them hitting initially when I had first seen them. So I thought that was really cool. And I didn't really no really great first experience with these movies. I watched Taxi Driver because I got it in college because I was like, I love Martin Scorsese. I hadn't seen this one. I got to watch it. The Taxi Driver and Raging Bull, I think I watched in like the same week in college because I was like, I'm gonna start ticking off more of these movies from Scorsese since I liked so many other movies that I'd seen of his. And then Summer of Sam, I remember when that came out in theaters, I remember it looked really cool. But even then, I remember thinking it was a little bit weird for a Spike Lee movie. It didn't feel, at least from the trailers, like a movie that he had made before. And honestly, rewatching it again, it actually feels like it owes a lot to Scorsese. The way it's shot, the way it's handled, a lot of the relationships in it feel very almost Scorsese inspired. But we can kind of get into that more. But I thought that was the main interesting point for me, just to generally to take away from that, is how differently these movies hit. And again, we had it with some other movies last year as well, but how differently they hit me, a couple decades later after seeing them the first time. But what about you two? You guys have any interesting first experiences with these movies, or anything like what I described where it hits you differently this time around?
Nothing really like you described, Jeff. I saw Taxi Driver years ago, and I think I saw it on TV. I saw it in some context where it was shown on like AMC. I think it had commercials, so it wasn't on like Turner Classic Movies. I think it was just something that I was watching, and it happened to come on TV. I knew it was a famous movie that I'd never seen. Um, and I honestly, I was young when I saw it, so I was probably like high school, late high school age. So this was like a really hard rewatch for me, just because um, hard in the sense of like it was a very serious rewatch because I basically had to watch it like it was a brand new movie because it wasn't one that I really remembered very vividly. And then I had never seen Summer of Sam, and honestly, just my experience with watching the movie was kind of interesting, just because I really wasn't. I think kind of one of my general weirdisms is kind of being interested in famous serial killers, and I didn't really know a lot about Son of Sam. So while I was watching the movie, I was kind of Googling Son of Sam and reading the Wikipedia about that person, and kind of sort of testing the historical narrative that it was trying to paint of like, is the timeline right here? Does this all make sense? Which I think Spike Lee did a pretty good job of lining everything up to roughly how it happened in real life. Obviously with the historical components, and then all the other characters are fictional. Um, but yeah, so it was kind of like it seemed Taxi Driver, but for me this week it was kind of like I was watching both these movies for the first time. So this was really sort of a first watch kind of week for me.
Yeah, I think I said this at the end of last week's episode. I don't remember when I first watched Taxi Driver. It was either late in high school or college. And I don't remember being incredibly moved by it one way or the other, aside from just being like, okay, that's a movie that I'm now seeing that's supposedly a classic. I can check that one off the list, and I haven't really thought much about it since. I had not seen Summer of Sam. I was so unfamiliar with it that I don't know about you guys, but when I go to rent movies a lot, some of these movies, if they're not streaming, sometimes I'll just rent them via YouTube, and so I'll search it on YouTube, and it looked like somebody had maybe uploaded the entire movie to YouTube, and so I clicked on it. I'm not advocating pirating or watching videos on YouTube by any means, but I started watching it, and it's Jimmy Breslin, the famous New York personality and reporter, and he starts talking. Which, if you've seen the movie, you know that's how the movie starts. But I didn't know this at the time. And so he's talking about the Summer of Sam murders, and then Son of Sam murders, and then it has the children's play block saying Son of Sam, and I stopped it. I'm like, is this like some made-for-TV movie cut or rip or something that someone has put on there? And so I stopped it, and then I actually literally paid money to rent it because I thought I had encountered something wrong. So imagine my shock when the real film starts the same way.
Hey, Spike Lee appreciates your patronage.
That's true. I'm always happy to be a supporter of the arts. I'd always prefer to pay for things if I can, but support the massive corporations that fund our entertainment industry. But yeah, so I hadn't seen that. I didn't even remember Adrian Brody was put up. I was like, oh, okay. So it was quite the ride. It's very rare anymore for me, I feel like, to see a movie that was this big, with this big director, big name actors and stuff, having entirely, zero preconceptions. So that was kind of fun.
Well, if I remember correctly, when Summer of Sam came out, it was sort of touted like it was going to be this big deal, and sort of presented that way. And I'm pretty sure it flopped hard at the box office and didn't really catch any of the cultural zeitgeist. Because another movie that I feel like it's worth drawing a comparison to, and Summer of Sam came before it, but is Zodiac. It's a very similar type of feel where it's trying to get that.
Yep, I wrote the exact same thing in my notes.
Yeah, and I know you're
Zodiac
a big
is
fan of that movie.
it's my favorite movie of all time, and so I actually wrote This is so Zodiac. How have I never seen this? Um, but what's interesting was watching the movie. It starts that way. It very much has a Zodiac feel, and I think maybe the reason people were perhaps disappointed by it in terms of box office receipts was that it really isn't about the Son of Sam. And like maybe if you kind of like Zodiac, you go into it and the promise of the premise is like it's about the Zodiac killer. And it's about people investigating the Zodiac killings in one way or another. Maybe if they're a police officer or a cartoonist, just an amateur person or a journalist. Uh, and really, what Summer of Sam is it's about the Son of Sam just kind of as a backdrop to these other things that are happening in these other characters' lives. I have no idea how this particular movie was marketed, but I get the sense. I did watch a trailer for it because I was curious, and so I just watched the one trailer that's like available on YouTube. It does kind of play it off like it's more of like, oh, this is sort of about the Son of Sam, and it doesn't really get into the aspect of it's really more like a character study of this neighborhood and the personalities of this neighborhood and how briefly at various interjections that the Son of Sam murders kind of interfere with their lives, and it's something that they kind of discuss. So I can kind of see maybe why audiences were a little bit disappointed by it.
Yeah, because to your point, Zodiac from the trailer, the movie that you go into Zodiac expecting to get is exactly what you get, and that is in the best way possible. Summer of Sam, yeah, it was because I remember it, even seeing the trailers. I remember live thinking that Zodiac hadn't been created yet, but thinking it was going to be a movie like that, like a procedural, if you will, and nowhere close, not even close to that. So um, that part is kind of interesting, and I would guess yes that you're right that that's most likely why it didn't succeed at the box office.
So before we compare and contrast, since for all intents and purposes, since Jeff, you didn't really remember much from seeing it the first time, and Nate, you had not seen it, and I had not seen it, Summer of Sam's before watching it. What did we think of it, of Summer of Sam? Because I have thoughts on it, and my my main takeaway from it really turns on this police procedural versus the story of these people, and with Summer of Sam on the back end. I think it's a little bloated. I think if the police procedural slash behind the scenes look at Sam's life, if that wasn't in there, I think this is almost like an elite movie. Now, I think it probably drops the ball a little bit at the end, but if the focus had been a little bit tighter on just Vinny and Deanna and Richie and Ruby and the crew, I think this could have been like a really, really effective, like 5-star movie. Um, I think because the scope got a little out there, it doesn't quite nail the landing. And there's some other problems that we'll probably talk about later. But did you guys like it first of all? And what's your takeaway?
It's interesting that
I
you say
will
that. You go
go ahead,
first, Nick.
Jeff.
Go ahead. All right, I'll go. Um, it's interesting that you say that because I almost word for word think exactly that. Like the last note I wrote was that I think there's a good movie in there, but the context betrays its own movie. Um, because just like what we were saying, you come in with this Son of Sam and you think it's going to be about this procedural, this sort of finding it, and the people in the neighborhood might be the ones affected by it the most because they're in the neighborhood where a lot of the killings happened, and so that you might just be getting that sort of slice of life understanding from their point of view. But no, it's just more about how these people were dealing with it, and by the end of the movie, I was kind of feeling like the Son of Sam himself, while being a historical figure, and Nate, you said it seems like that Spike Lee did a pretty good job of nailing down the timeline and everything. But even without that, like it still feels like the Son of Sam himself was almost an allegory for what these people were experiencing. Because to me, I felt like this movie, the main sort of underlying theme was shame for these people. Like there was it just felt to me like they they had so much shame about who they were, and they couldn't, like, all of them, right? Like Vinny, Richie, all of them were trying to be somebody else, and they were trying to be different, and there was this sort of this idea that they weren't comfortable with who they were, and so they had to have these sort of outbursts of being somebody else, right? Like Richie would go and he would dance in the gay strip club, and then um, Vinny would go and he would cheat on his wife, and they would all sort of have these things, and it's almost sort of runs parallel to these outbursts that the Son of Sam had, that were of course involving murder, which is a level far above what these other people were doing. But I thought that was kind of interesting, and the only problem is I felt like exactly what you were saying, Steve. The whole Son of Sam stuff gets bogged down. We keep getting thrown to these these scenes of Sam Richard Berkowitz, or Richard David what's his David Berkowitz. Thank you, David Berkowitz, in his apartment, and he's going crazy and he's yelling at the dog and all this kind of stuff. But there's such little context for that. It's just like, this feels weird. It feels out of place in this movie. And then it also gives this sort of external pressure that almost justifies what these people are doing. And again, I think, Steve, it would have been, like you were saying, it would have been a much more interesting sort of character study and idea, much more interesting premise to look at these people from their neighborhood and their upbringing and the culture of their neighborhood, which is itself a character in the movie, which is very Scorsese-like, actually, but which ultimately sort of gets bogged down in this serial killer on the loose and all this sorts of thing. But I agree. I thought if you would have taken that out, it would have been much more interesting.
I found myself, and unfortunately, I probably won't be able to bury the lead too much tonight. I found myself disliking the movie the more it went on, and I think for all the reasons that you guys are saying. And again, it's probably a little bit as a matter of expectations that I'm such a huge fan of Zodiac, and when we're watching these movies, the first thing that I do is I'm looking at the Wikipedia and I'm just kind of looking at general information about it. I mean, I'll describe this over audio, but I'm going to show my co-host here what the poster of the movie looks like. And to describe it, it is a this little collage of all these newspaper headlines entirely about Son of Sam, with like big red lettering over it that's like clearly like it's designed to look like it's handwritten, and it says SOS Summer of Sam. Like, this really, when you just going into this movie and the way that it's presented to audiences, you really feel like, I'm going to watch a movie about a serial killer. Like, this is going to be that procedural that I want. And it's just not that. I think that, again, to echo both of your sentiments, I think there's a good movie in here somewhere. I think that the idea of taking a serial killer and examining not the serial killer, but the lives of people and how it affects an everyday life. But again, as you said, I think Steve was the one that said it's really bloated. If you're going to do that, then you can't have the scenes with the police talking to the mobsters. Like, that's a procedural. You can't have these scenes where Son of Sam, David Berkowitz, is freaking out and yelling at you can't make him a character. And so I just kind of feel like Spike Lee couldn't pick here. I think there is that aspect of the police procedural, but then he goes back into this focus on these ordinary people in this neighborhood with this really rich history and these very kind of quirky characters throughout. And it feels like two different movies, and the more it went on and the more those two things collide, I feel like he obviously, clearly at the end, he's trying to bring those two worlds together. And for me, it just it just didn't work. It didn't work for me, and I found myself slowly disliking it the more and more that it went on.
I think sorry guys, I think this is one of these instances where knowing a little bit about how the movie got made really tells us a lot. So Spike Lee co-wrote it. He has co-writing credits with Michael Imperioli, one of the guys from Jeff's favorite shows, The Sopranos, and Victor, I'm gonna butcher this Italian name, Colicchio. He's also he's been in he was in Goodfellas. He was one of the guys. I think he's the guy that says Mook in Mean Streets also. Maybe not. I might be getting my Italian actors confused, but regardless, he's kind of a bit player in a lot of those movies. But these two guys co-wrote it, and they wrote it, and I think brought it to Spike. And they did drafts upon drafts upon drafts. And this is a quote from Michael Imperioli. He said, "We took it to certain companies. It was rough going, as it often is for first-time directors." He was going to direct it originally. My partner, Victor Colicchio, and I, we did more drafts, and the scope of the movie kept on getting bigger. It went from this small neighborhood character study to a story of New York City at the time of the Son of Sam killings. I began to feel the movie got a little too big in scope for me to tackle as a first-time director. Around that time, Spike said he wanted to direct it. And so at that point, that's when Spike took over. The narrative remained the same, but then everything else was kind of grafted on there. The original narrative was the Richie story and the Victor story, because Imperioli had a friend, I guess, that was kind of like Richie, and I guess Imperioli is kind of the Victor. Maybe not the bad parts of it, but that's the viewpoint. The POV.
You mean
POV.
Vinny?
Yes. I'm sorry. What did I say? Victor.
Victor. Yeah.
Yes. Right. Vinny. Yes.
Okay.
So that's kind of exactly what happened. It just grew way too big. And to its detriment, which is really unfortunate. So, because the original script never even left the Bronx. Spike, this is a quote from Spike, but I wanted to incorporate other parts of New York City. So when they go, Studio 54 and CBGB, which has some great gags, but those really kind of don't help the narrative so much.
Those felt like, okay, we want to have a club scene, we want to involve Studio 54. How do we shoehorn this into the plot that these random people from the Bronx are going to roll up into Studio 54, right?
And like the blackouts, and again, that's part of that summer. I totally recognize that. I just feel like the blackout thing would have been way. I think it would have been way more effective if just the characters in this world, the blackout happens to them,
right?
And they're mentioning the blackout,
right?
Rather than these cuts to these news reports where Spike Lee is playing a news reporter and he's going around interviewing these people and watching people looting and rob stores during the blackout. He really tried to make it this big thing about, and again, I mean, like the 77 blackout, I feel like that's its own thing. I mean, that's almost its own movie by itself, and yet we're trying to kind of push that in. Just feel like that would have been way more effective if that would have just happened to the characters.
Or hell, they could even be seeing him on the TV, if he really wanted to do the cameo. But yeah,
right. I think the one thing that they did pretty well was the one theme that they handled well in that regard in the movie is the Yankees, the New York Yankees season. Because as it starts to go on, I kind of get to the place like, oh my God, you're gonna have these characters like at a frickin' Yankee game, and they don't ever do that. Like you do just kind of hear the Yankees on the radio, and I kind of feel like all the other stuff would have been better if it was just that. If like Son of Sam and the blackout and the Yankees and all that stuff was kind of the background noise to the characters' lives, and again, it doesn't do that. It really tries to bring in all these different worlds, and it gets jumbled. And I think the quote from the book there, one of the screenwriters, I think that says it all. I think he kind of agrees with us.
One of the screenwriters, American hero Michael Imperioli. He
okay.
actually
also known as Spider from
yes,
Goodfellas. That's right.
Goodfellas,
of course.
Yep. Yeah.
So timing wise, this is kind of interesting. Jeff, you'll appreciate this. This was shot almost concurrently with the first season of Sopranos, or at least the pilot, right around there. And I can't remember the exact details of how it synced up, but I guess he also wrote some Sopranos episodes. Mm-hmm. But the way the timing worked out, he had only acted in Sopranos, and then this came out, and he was able to say to the showrunners, whoever, the folks that made the decision on Sopranos, hey, look at this, I wrote this. And they're like, okay, we'll give him a shot, and it worked out for him. So
nice. Yeah, it's even the ending itself almost feels like us as the audience, right? Because there's this climax with the Richie scene. They're all showing up to his house, and they're beating him, they're kicking the shit out of him, and you know all this stuff has come out like, oh, he's stripping in this uh gay strip club, he's doing pornos, he's doing all these things, and this isn't the Richie that we knew. What do we know about him? He's probably the son of Sam. We gotta take him down. We gotta take this upon ourselves and save our neighborhood, right? And then in the middle of all this, Richie's stepdad, I guess, comes out and is just like, "Hey, it's all over the news. They already caught the son of Sam." And then that's kind of basically how we are as viewers, where it's just like the this son of Sam stuff is just sort of shoehorned into this otherwise very interesting and intricate narrative of all these people. So it, it feels like one of those things where, especially with everybody involved having more clout now than they would have then, that the movie could have been made a lot differently if it was made today, which is kind of unfortunate. But yeah, it was. Yeah, especially at the ending, I was just kind of like, it sort of robs the climax a little bit when, again, this the son of Sam killer is just this sort of it it's just a sort of excuse, almost this sort of external force that's just like, oh well, now we can blame our actions on this crazy thing that's going on, and we can like, oh well, they already caught the son of Sam, we were wrong, sorry Richie, we'll see you later, and it's just I don't know, it the whole thing was they were using the son of Sam as an excuse to basically try to confront this Richie who was different than what they remember, who's different than their neighborhood sort of culture allows people to be. There's a lot of homophobia going on in there. And so the idea of like, oh, is he gay? What's going on? And all this stuff. And just a lot of that. And that stuff's really interesting, how these people deal with it and how they, but again, it kept getting blown up by all this Son of Sam stuff. And yeah, if it was just on the context and the background, and that's why people were dyeing their hair, the women were dyeing their hair blondes and stuff like that, that would be little nice, little interesting little wrinkles to this story. But just to be the main focus of the story, but also not the main focus, it just really weird. It made it uneven.
Yeah, it works so well as background and a reflection of their paranoia about, well, is Richie gay? They're dealing drugs? Are the cops coming around? Diana, is my husband cheating on me? It works so well as a reflection of all of their fears and paranoias and deep mistrust of each other and just Americans in their country at the time in the mid 70s. But to have it be its own separate thread, it was just too much. It was too much for one movie. It could have been a classic. An hour in, I literally wrote down, I was like, this may be one of my favorite movies ever at the hour mark point. We had Chekhov's Baba O'Reilly, because he says Baba O'Reilly is one of my favorite songs. And then we have a Baba O'Reilly freaking montage with like a BDSM sex show, drugs usage, the Yankees, Son of Sam murder, like all happening at once in a montage. I'm like, this is awesome. And then from there, like you said, the more we watched it, it just kind of, it got not worse. That's not really, it wasn't ever bad. It was bloated, and it was just too much to put in one movie, I think.
It betrayed itself, is
That's a
how
good
I
way to
kind
say
of
it. Yeah.
feel like it. And I think that's yeah, because I really liked the Vinny character too. I'm a big John Leguizamo fan, just regardless. But I thought he was good in this movie, and I thought his character was really interesting. There was a lot of, and this kind of felt almost Scorsese like as well, where he was, a lot of his guilt for cheating
Yes.
on his
I'm
wife was
glad you brought this
religious
up.
based, and
Mhm.
he was. There were scenes where he's going to church, he's kneeling down, he's asking for forgiveness. He's part of the problem, part of the reason he justifies cheating on his wife is because he says doing these things that he does with other women with his wife is sinful. It's sinful to get oral sex from your wife or whatever the case may be. And it's like you know, he's got all these weird hangups because sex for him is this source of manliness, this source of power, this source of engagement he has with life, but then it's also this major source of shame. And as someone who grew up Catholic, I can tell you that's very much how the Catholic Church can tend to treat sex and how it sort of feels, because you've got this, society treats sex one way, right? But then if you're like me and you went to Catholic school and then you go to church on Sundays and you do that thing as you're growing up, then it's all, um, you know, sex is procreation, not recreation. Sex is for marriage, all this sort of stuff. And so there is this sort of weird guilt that goes with it that just, a lot of religion sort of brings you up in. And that's something that we've talked about already that Scorsese has dealt with a lot. So I thought that was really interesting that was a specific plot point in this movie. And I thought, the Vinny character and how Leguizamo presented that was done very well.
It's almost as if it's Spike Lee doing Marty Scorsese, like doing Mean Streets and Who's That Knocking at My Door. Not only, with the themes of the Catholic guilt, but just the subjects, the Italian neighborhood, the Italian good old, not good fellas because they're not mob guys, but just the guys on the street, the neighborhood guys. And just kind of the way it's shot too, especially when they're just hanging out in the cul-de-sac there. Michelle, at one point, my wife, she walked in, she's like, "Is this the Scorsese movie?" I was like, "No, actually, this is the Spike Lee movie." Now that could be the subject or the way it's shot, but I'm not,
And at the beginning too, like all the scenes where Son of Sam Killer is shooting them in the cars. I mean, those could be almost taken straight from a Scorsese movie.
I was going to ask you guys about the technical aspects, because I wrote down that it felt to me like some of the shots and the way that some of the cinematography was used, especially I also wrote down like an example, the way that they shot, the way how the pasta was brought out when they served the cops. It was like a long kind of tracking shot, but they kept it on like a dolly the whole way. I don't know. A lot of that, and there were the close-ups too. It was very interesting. A lot of it reminded me of some of these scenes we'd seen in like Goodfellas and Mean Streets. It almost seemed like an homage in certain ways to.
Well, at the very beginning, they have a huge needle drop as they roll into a club, introduced to all the characters. I mean,
yeah.
How do you get more Scorsese than that?
Yeah, the club scene is the one where you definitely feel it the most, where they basically go into kind of this disco. There's kind of this is kind of at the period where I was still sort of liking it at the beginning. There's kind of this cool extended dance sequence. And I liked that and kind of felt like part of that world. I feel like one of the things I actually wrote this down is and this is just sort of a natural disadvantage, is both of these movies are really heavily steeped in and depicting 1970s New York. The disadvantage that Spike Lee has is that he's making his movie in the 90s, and Martin Scorsese happens to be shooting his in 1970s New York. So that so I tried not to weigh that too much, but Taxi Driver just kind of had more of a real feel to me, just because it actually is the 1970s, and everything just sort of in Summer of Sam kind of felt like a facade. I kind of felt like 70s, how they're really throwing this whole world at you. I personally thought I thought the characterization in the movie gets really bogged down and really weighed down. I feel like a lot of these people are kind of almost stereotypes. They're more like caricatures rather than characters. They kind of get to a place for me where they don't even really feel real. There's just kind of this real impulsive thing about all of them, and it just for me, I just don't think a lot of it is earned. And again, I try to kind of occasionally swap the order of the filmmakers that I watch it, but this week I watched Summer of Sam first, and then I watched Taxi Driver, and just to go from one to the other, you can just see a real difference in the craft, and you can see a real difference in the efficiency of what the director is trying to accomplish. for me. So that's
So here's
as
here's a
we kind of
question.
as we transition.
Well, here's a question. So, you talked about sort of impulsivity of the characters in Summer of Sam. So that is a very sort of hallmark of Scorsese characters, and always seems to be a sort of praise point for him. So what made that aspect of these characters different for you watching Summer of Sam versus when you watch a Scorsese movie like Mean Streets or something?
Well, you'll remember that one of my criticisms of Mean Streets was that the characters were. I talked about this thing in the early 1970s that there was this concern, particularly when The Godfather came out, that that was going to perpetuate these negative stereotypes of Italian Americans. And I said, Mean Streets came out like the same year within a year or two, and I was like, I think this perpetuates way worse stereotypes of Italian Americans. Like, and we talked about that, a couple weeks ago, where it was just like every single guy just comes in and they start arguing. So they start arguing and then they start fighting, and that's what. So that to me, Summer of Sam, that is kind of more like what they were like. So I mean, I really didn't like that impulsivity and this real sort of brash stereotype. Um, and again, I think Taxi Driver is a great example of how, uh, not that obviously Robert De Niro is Italian American, but not that it's specifically depicting an Italian American person. Um, but I think Scorsese starts to get to a place in his career because Taxi Driver is still one of his earlier films. Very quickly, kind of gets to a place where Taxi Driver does this great job where they have these very quiet moments, and they're not caricatures of some kind of ethnic stereotype. These characters really live and breathe and are unique and different, and you feel like everything is earned. You feel like everything is very purposeful, and the characterization works because it feels real and it's obviously exceptionally well acted. Not that Summer of Sam isn't well acted. I just think that the way they're, for grading the filmmakers, I think the way they're being directed here is just kind of, it's everything is up here. Everything is at the highest possible level. They are cranked to 10 in every scene, and I personally, this is just personal preference. My personal preference is always those movies that are quieter and have those quiet moments and actually use silence in kind of interesting, creative ways. And I think Scorsese has done that for many years. And I think Taxi
He
Driver, maybe
literally
his
has a
first
movie
real.
named Silence.
Yes, he has a movie named Silence. Um, and I think that utilizing that silence, I think Taxi Driver is probably the first movie where he really learned to do that really, really well, where there's just really quiet moments. When I think of the scene where uh, Travis goes into Travis, the Robert De Niro character, he goes into uh, the politician's office for the campaign office, basically. He asks the girl out. She agrees to go. It's kind of awkward, but she agrees to go out with him. And there are just these, when they are sitting and they're having coffee together, there's just these really smart, punctuated pauses where neither of them says anything. And you're kind of trying to weigh what's comfortable to them and what's not comfortable to them, and you're really trying to get into the level of characters and what they're thinking. And then later, when he goes back in after she's kind of stopped answering his phone calls, they have this terrible first date, entirely his fault, and they have this terrible first date. And then she kind of stops. He calls her once, he talks to her once on the phone, but then later she stops answering. He confronts her in the campaign office again, and then you do kind of see that impulsiveness come out. And that's the reason it feels earned. The reason it feels earned is because the earlier scene where he's being so quiet, you know that that is a restraint. You know that that person is trying to restrain everything that they're about because maybe they really do like this girl, and they're trying to almost present themselves as something that they're
Hide the
not.
crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Because he is crazy. I mean, he's a crazy person. But then he goes in, he's fighting. He almost gets into like an argument, like he, postures at a guy with like the fists and stuff. And that to me, I feel like all of Summer of Sam is like that. Taxi Driver has these small moments that are like that that feel earned because he's building to this. In the scenes where he's not like that, he's restraining it and he's hiding it. And he's trying to keep this part of himself inside. You also see it in the scene where he's talking to the other taxi driver, And it kind of a rare moment, I think, probably particularly for movies made in the 1970s, where you kind of have these two men talking about their mental health, which, I mean,
Yeah, I thought
in,
I wrote that down. I was like ahead of its
yeah,
time. I mean,
yeah,
yeah.
kind of, yeah, maybe, yeah, kind of ahead of its time, where he's saying like, I don't know, man, like I don't know, I get these weird ideas in my head. I get, kind of scary ideas in my head. I just feel like everything when he kind of finally goes off the rails, it feels really earned. It's a great progression of a character, and Scorsese handles it perfectly. And I think Robert De Niro, obviously, this is one of the great acting performances of his career, and I think it shows because he's able to build that restraint and then kind of blow up at just the right times.
Yeah, and to that point in that particular scene, which I thought too was one of my favorites, where he's like, I don't know, man, I got these thoughts, these bad thoughts going through my head, and all the wizard is the name of the character, Peter Boyle, who I love. Young Frankenstein is one of my all-time favorites. I love he's the monster in that movie. But essentially Peter Boyle's he gives some sort of weird advice, I guess, and then essentially it just boils down to he ends it this way. He's like, you're gonna be all right. You're gonna be all right. And that's very much what men are told. That still a lot to this day, even though it's gotten better, but especially then was just like, you're gonna be fine. But I wanted to just kind of, before we fully transition to Taxi Driver, something you brought up about how the sort of quiet moments and how they feel earned. I think one of the bigger missteps that Summer of Sam made was they needed more Mira Sorvino, because she was like the quietest actor, if you will, quiet in the sense that you're talking about, sort of introspective and stuff. Like there were, some of the best moments where, you know, early on in the movie, John Leguizamo cheats on her. Like they're at the club. He's like, he's got Mira Sorvino's cousin is there, and we got to take her home. And he's like, I'll give her a ride home. And then he has sex with her on the ride home, and then goes back to the club. And then Mira Sorvino goes in to kiss him, and she tastes her cousin essentially. And so but she doesn't say anything, but you can see in the look on her face, she immediately recognizes, she immediately knows, but she's trying to convince herself how this is okay, etc. And then after they have a huge blow up fight, Vinny comes to the house, and she comes to the door, and she opens the door, and he's like, come on, just come out and talk to me, come on. And she just turns around and she closes the door. So like those moments I thought were really well done, and were kind of more along the lines of what you were saying. And then that, because even though those both didn't happen before the blow up felt kind of earned, because you could see her sort of bottling this stuff up. So she was the only character I think that sort of embodied that aspect of it. And I wrote that down. I was like, they need more Mira Sorvino in this movie, because she really sort of provided that aspect that I do agree was missing. So I think that was a big misstep for them.
I think her acting was some of the best in the movie, and I think if I'm correct, I think she was an Academy Award winner at the time.
Yeah, she won in '96, I think.
So it shows. I was thinking about this, Nate, when you were talking about this, and to your point, Jeff, I kind of feel I'm working through a theory here in my head. I kind of feel like some of Spike Lee's movies, and I think this really works for him, and is maybe partially why it's been successful. And some of the biggest moments in some of his best films, it's almost kind of like a stage play type format where, in a play, you don't get up close and personal on a person's face, of course. You can't see all the inner workings. You can't really see what's going on inside their head via their facial tics and real subtle performances. People have to project. They have to, speak loudly. They have to kind of really emote. And I kind of feel like we saw that a lot with there's bigger than life characters, with big personalities, and a lot of characters say what they mean, and they kind of say their feelings a lot. I'm trying to think of some good examples right now, but I'm thinking a lot of like some of Giancarlo Esposito's characters, both in School Days and Do the Right Thing. I think that was one of the things you disliked about, what's his character? Do the Right Thing. Regardless. Yeah, Bugging Out. I think Nate, you didn't like Bugging Out, or was it Jeff? Regardless, you thought maybe it was a little over the top.
It was me. Yeah.
I think that's symptomatic of kind of maybe what I'm thinking about here. And I think when it works, it actually does work. And it kind of, especially like Do the Right Thing, where the neighborhood is the setting for this stage play. And you have the characters coming on stage and going off stage, and that's what the movie is. Whereas Scorsese and Taxi Driver, as you're saying, Nate, it's a character study, and you have to get down and work into the inner workings of this guy's mind. Now, it is also on a stage, New York in the 70s, but it's really about this guy and his fucked up brain. And I just think that's an interesting dichotomy. I'm trying to figure out if this means anything, if this is a real valid observation.
Well, and to your point, just on that last thing that you said, the Taxi Driver is set in the 70s in New York because, as you were saying earlier, Nate, it was made in the 70s in New York. It was a conscious choice for Summer of Sam to have it set in the 70s in New York. So there was time spent on making that a character, I think. And I do actually think that was pretty effective.
And an interesting reason for that too is, Michael Imperioli grew up then. He literally said the movies he was watching in the hot, muggy, sticky summer when Sam, David Berkowitz was killing people, was Taxi Driver in the theaters. So that movie influenced this movie. We cannot, these movies and these directors, they keep coming back to each other and bouncing off of each other. It's pretty crazy, but you can definitely tell, like you said. I mean, Taxi Driver was one of the hottest, muggiest summers that they had, and it just jumps off the screen. You can see it's just disgusting and filthy. I guess Scorsese had taken some flack when he shot Mean Streets because a lot of it was shot in Los Angeles, and so they brought in some trash and shit to make the scenes look more like New York. And so he got some critics that were like, it looks, there's too much trash. It looks too fake. And he's like, no, this is what it really looked like. And so he says in one of his books, when they shot on scene, in New York, there was a trash strike going on. And he's like, oh my God, everybody's going to think I'm taking it way over the top on this.
I'm the trash guy director now.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the city is just alive and filthy, and you can feel. He describes. I want to read this quote later. You guys, if you have some, to say about this concept of the city as a character, I kind of took us off track there, but.
Well, it's something that we've talked about mostly in the context of Scorsese, but both these directors are very New York focused, and you can tell they love where they're from. They love the city, and the city to them has a life, is a character, and they pay their respects in the movies that they're making. And that's really what it feels like. And that comes across, and I don't think this isn't a criticism necessarily, but it comes across more to me from Scorsese's work than it does necessarily from Spike Lee's. But in this particular instance, I actually think it's more prevalent in Summer of Sam than it was in Taxi Driver, but it's still there in both of them. And it's kind of a common theme of the setting and the culture specifically around the setting that is specific to it, specific to the city, not even specific to the city, specific to the area of the city, and even more so to the block of the city. In a place like New York, so many people, so many apartment complexes and stuff, each block can almost have its own sort of mini microculture.
And they shot it live or on site in Brooklyn.
Yeah, and they know that, those two directors, and I think they really try their best to show it. And I think honestly they're both very successful at it when they really do.
All right, so with the city as character, Scorsese said about shooting Taxi Driver specifically, there's something about summertime in New York that is extraordinary. We shot the film during a very hot summer, and there's an atmosphere at night that's like a seeping kind of virus. You can smell it in the air and taste it in your mouth. It reminds me of the scene in the Ten Commandments portraying the killing of the firstborn, where the cloud seeps in, and it goes on and on. where it creeps in through the door and kills the kids. But it just, I think they absolutely capture that in the way that Taxi Driver is shot. It just, the city and the heat and the humidity is oppressive. You can feel it closing in on Travis, and it creates this level of paranoia that I think is unrivaled in Summer of Sam. Even though they really do try, I think, also with cinematography and all that. But I think Taxi Driver, there's no debate there. You guys agree? Disagree?
Well, I think Scorsese uses location shooting as good as any filmmaker has ever used it in this film. I don't know if this turned up in your research, but I know I've read this just from film school, and I knew this from film school kind of going into it, that there's a shot, it's a location shot, that Scorsese says is the most important shot in the movie. And it's when Travis is on the phone with the girl, and you just hear Travis's side of the conversation. He's clearly being rejected. And it kind of stays on him for a minute, and then it dollies over to the right. It just shows this long, barren, empty hallway. At the end of the hallway is the street of New York, and there's people walking by it. And it kind of shows in this single shot his isolation from the rest of the city and how alone he feels. Scorsese has said that. Scorsese has said, like, we did that shot and I moved it over because it's just like, it was almost like the conversation he's having is too pathetic and lonely to even witness anymore. And you almost just want to like move away from it because of how obvious it feels to us, the audience, but like he's not taking the hint and it just feels so pathetic. It moves over and you just get this long shot of this hallway. And then at the very end of the hallway, there's kind of an open door and you can see out into the city. And I think that compared to, in my opinion, Summer of Sam, when they're kind of at the end of this cul-de-sac, or it's not even a cul-de-sac, just kind of an end of a street, and there's kind of a big guardrail, and there's water on the other side. It's a weird set piece, and they return to it a lot, and there's not a lot to me, there wasn't a lot very visually interesting about it, and they're there a lot. And they're arguing with each other a lot, and they're fighting, and they're going back and forth, and they're accusing people of things, and there was something that I don't know why that set piece was utilized. I mean, obviously they utilized it because probably they could shoot there, and they location scouted it there. But there's other interesting scenes. There's other interesting set pieces in that movie. That is not one of them, and they returned. That's probably where there's more scenes set in that spot than any other scene. And again, comparing these two particular films this week, when you look at that set piece for like every time you go back, you're like, oh Jesus Christ, like, ugh. And then we're back in this place where, let me guess, they're going to argue and accuse each other and yell at each other. I'm shocked.
They're gonna smoke. They're gonna smoke a lot of cigarettes too.
They're gonna smoke. They're gonna deal drugs. They're going to make fun of the gay man who wanders by and make super awful homophobic remarks. And
hey, but he's their gay guy. They went and they beat up the guy that beat him up.
They did. Yeah. They do, honestly, in a very strangely progressive moment. Like they do kind of take ownership of him as like this local representation of LGBTQ, and they kind of end up defending him in this very weird way. So that's kind of a weird part of the movie. But compared like that set piece to the scene I just talked about with the hallway, or every time he is in the taxi, there's this claustrophobia to it. He utilizes these great inserts of him looking in the rearview mirror. When he gets the politician in his car, he's talking to him, and there's this great insert shot of politician's kind of trying to make conversation with him. He kind of looks up and he sees his name, and it has that insert shot of his name, Travis Binkle, and he says, "Well, Travis, how do you?" It's just there's just kind of this the scene, and we might talk a little later about the two directors as actors, but the scene where he has the guy played by Martin Scorsese in the back of his car, and it's this really haunting, kind of disturbing moment. And it feels like, oh my God, like I just want to get out of this car, but like in a good way as an audience. Like
somebody crazier than me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. It's like, exactly. It's like, I feel like, man, I'm slipping, but holy shit, this guy's like
Look at all this
might
guy.
literally he might literally be about to kill, like he's telling me he's going to kill someone, and that it just those moments feel so much more raw and real, and I think the locations and are just used so much more effectively in Taxi Driver than they are in Summer of Sam.
Well, one thing I could say, one could argue with Summer of Sam that the reason they keep returning to this place is because it's essentially a dead end, right? The street just stops, like you said, and there's no place for them to go, and this is where they're at, and they can't move forward, and there's sort of this almost claustrophobic feeling for them. And it's actually interesting that you talk about Taxi Driver and the feeling of claustrophobia when he's in the taxi, because I had the exact opposite feeling, right? Because when I'm watching that and he's driving through the city, especially when another parallel we have here are these very similar voiceovers. Like there simply has to be, there's no way that, I don't know if they took the voiceover in Summer of Sam from the actual diaries that Berkowitz wrote. I don't know if that's a thing, but I mean, they feel so similar to the narration or to the voiceover in Taxi Driver. It almost has to be influenced by it. But regardless, like when Travis is driving, it almost feels like this sort of massive city, right? Like he drives forever and ever, and he's still in the city. He's away from, and they talk about it. They talk about it a lot. He's like, I just want to drive and drive, and they're like, you drive from all over the place, don't you, Travis? From one end of the city to the other, and so much, and how this city is so big, and it's like this huge monster you can never get your arms around. And so like I can definitely see where, inside the cab it might have this sort of claustrophobia feeling, but to me, the just the ideas presented were the opposite, where it's just like he feels like in Summer of Sam, it felt like the characters themselves thought the city felt small because they felt sort of cramped in and claustrophobic, whereas to me, Travis felt like the city was huge, and that was part of the problem, right?
Well,
I
that's
mean, we
another way
know.
of being trapped, though, Jeff. Like, if he can drive that far and that long, but still never get out of the city, he's still trapped.
Right, that's what I'm saying, and yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with that for sure. I just,
I
as
almost
opposed to being sort of like
Just confined.
claustrophobic,
Yeah,
like he's confined, more just like I can't escape it. It's this
I got you.
maze
I got
of
you.
city and filth, as he
We're on the
calls
same
it. You know?
wavelength. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I almost see that's all interesting analysis that I do kind of agree with. I see almost the taxi as an extension of his mind, and voiceovers happening a lot when he's in the taxi, and it's like when he's not in that taxi, he can't be with people and he can't relate to people. He just has to have these brief moments where people are riding in the back of his car, and that's really the only normal human interaction that he can be allowed. And whenever he goes outside of the taxi, he really doesn't get it. He kind of has the little diner place that he hangs out with the other taxi drivers, but you notice he's always really quiet. They're all talking, and he's the one that's kind of quiet. And then he tries to arrange the date with the girl, and obviously that goes horribly because when he goes outside, like he's not a normal person. He
Yeah.
clearly has some kind of psychosis. Yeah, like I mean, yeah, he's just he is crazy, and I think that I mean that particular scene, he basically he takes this girl on a date to what is essentially like a pornographic theater, and he's looking at a pornographic film. But what's interesting about it is like he doesn't like the girl's like, you're kidding.
He's taken aback
This is
on
what
her reaction. Yeah.
yeah, he has no. She's like, you're kidding. This is a dirty movie. He's like, no, like this is like an art movie. Like people come and see these movies. And of course they go in, and it is like it's a pornographic film, and he can't understand. He has no idea why this young lady is really disturbed and bothered by this random guy that's taking her on a date, and like they go to a porno theater. It just kind of shows that sadness and isolation in his mind. And to me, the taxi is like the safe space, but it's safe for him. I say claustrophobic because it doesn't feel safe for us because he's talking and he's narrating these things, and it just kind of starts to get weirder and weirder and weirder. And But again, I think all interpretations of it are correct. I think there's a lot of different interpretations of what it means. Um, but for me, it's claustrophobic in the sense that we just feel like we're inside his mind. He's safe there, but I don't think we necessarily feel safe there.
Yeah, and there's another interpretation that sort of kind of takes a little bit bits and pieces from all this, and that's almost that you could see the taxi cab as his shield from the outside world, right? Because that's a very good point that you mentioned about how once he gets out of the cab, he's different. He can't interact. Like when he's driving, and that's where most, like you said, where most of the narration takes place. He's talking and he's talking about the filth and the trash and all these different slurs and everything that he's throwing out about all these people. Um, but then, his shift's over and he goes and he gets a bottle of peach schnapps and he's just chugging on it as he's walking down the street, and then he buys a ticket to a seedy, even more seedy than the one that he takes the date to, really seedy porno shop, right, to essentially presumably go and you know entertain himself, if you will. But it's like he's the is he any better? I wrote that down. I was like, is he not just the trash that he's talking about, right? Like he's saying all these people, these the prostitutes and whoever, and then he's sitting there and he's essentially doing a lot of the same stuff that he
There's
sees
not a lot
as
of
filth.
self-awareness in these movies.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has kind of and I don't know, I did not see this in my research, but I really felt that this is, Jeff, to answer your question from the very beginning of this episode, this is what felt different to me watching this movie. As more of an adult, and I'm perhaps a little bit more well-read and maybe understand things a little bit better than I did, certainly when I was 17 or 18 years old, is I kind of wonder if like Catcher in the Rye was an influence on this movie, because it very much has that feel, where Holden Caulfield, everyone's a phony and everything is phony, but the whole irony of the entire book is that he's describing himself. In the book Catcher in the Rye, going to the movie. Oh my God, if you go to the movies, you're the biggest phony. You're such a phony, and he's always going to the movies. Like every single other scene in the book, he just got out of a movie. He's always describing himself, and I completely agree that Travis here in this movie is like he's describing the city as very filthy. He even said to the guy running for president, like, "Man, you need to clean up this city. There's just a lot of trash, and there's a lot of really seedy characters and there's bad news around this town." And like he's the guy, he's the guy that later thinks in his head, like, I should kill him. Like I should assassinate a presidential candidate. Like he's the filth that he's describing. And so I don't think it's just a lack of self-awareness. I think that's kind of the irony of the whole story, is that, it's all of this is a mirror. We're all looking in a mirror and we're all looking back at ourselves. Best exemplified, by the way, by perhaps the most famous mirror scene in any movie ever, You Talking to Me. Like, and I maybe we're going a little too like Great Gatsby Greenlight with this. Like, are we overanalyzing this a little too much? But I mean, I kind of think that. I mean, I really do think that Scorsese is a good enough filmmaker that is kind of his intention, that if everything is sort of this mirror back onto himself, the fact that there's this extended sequence where he's talking in the mirror and is kind of trying out these characters and has the guns and is almost like kind of pretending to be, something that he's not, but he really wants to become this person. You talking to me? You talking to me? There's no one else here. You talking to me? And I think that scene just kind of brings home that notion, Jeff, that you're talking about of, he is the filth. And whether he sees that or not, he's looking at himself and he's talking about himself and he's describing these things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that, and I think that's part of what makes this movie feel so differently to me than most of Scorsese's work. I think there's a lot that Scorsese in his movies can leave up to interpretation, but I don't know that he has any movie that's as metaphorical as this movie is. And it like I was as we were going through it, I actually wrote down, as like, this feels more like a David Lynch movie. I don't know how many David Lynch fans we got here, but like there's this scene early on where Sybil Shepherd as Betsy, she's talking to Albert Brooks, right? And they're both perfect actors to deliver these lines, but um, they're talking about what happens when mafia catches somebody and decides to kill them because or sorry, when the mafia catches somebody who was squealing on that, being an informant, whatever, and they decide to they're gonna they're gonna kill him, and then Albert Brooks is like, "Oh, do you know what they do to a stool pigeon when they find him and they know he's squawking to the cops? They kill him and they leave a canary." And then the Betsy character is like, "Why not leave a pigeon?" And it's like those types of sort of almost non sequitur dialogues, but it's like makes sense as such an obvious question. But movies don't a lot of times they don't ask those like silly obvious questions that you might ask in like Steve, if you and I are talking about something, I'd be like, why don't they leave a pigeon? Right? Like we would bring that up, but like we kind of have our own eccentricities when we have conversations, you know, and the normal people do.
That would
And
derail us
movies
for an entire afternoon at work.
exactly, yeah. And movies don't necessarily they don't necessarily have time to allow for these things to happen. And that's one of the things that David Lynch does really well. But yeah, so just stuff like that, and then that Nate, you already mentioned it when they have that date at the diner, Travis and Betsy, and there's these sort of awkward silences, and the way they're talking is they're talking to each other, but also like around each other, and feeling each other out and not understanding each other and their motivations, and because Travis is he's playing the part of like, oh, I think Palatine is great. He's gonna, he's gonna win, but he doesn't care. He doesn't know about politics, and he's kind of trying to understand what her motivation is, and then she's trying to understand who this guy is, and I think she's maybe flattered a little bit by the fact that he, was so upfront with about how he thought she was beautiful and wanted to take her out, and so that's why she did it, and she was curious, but then she can't understand him. She can't figure him out, and you can't because he's flipping nuts. And so it's like, yeah, that was another great scene that I you don't typically see stuff like that in Scorsese's movies, and you don't. Again, I haven't seen all of them, so I won't say that you don't ever see it, but especially up to this point in his career, and then even quite a bit afterwards, I would say, just again, like you said earlier, Nate, that sort of deliberateness, that silence, that pacing. It's a lot of Scorsese's movies have that sort of frenetic pace. The Departed, Goodfellas, Casino. It's one person into the next. These huge ensemble casts, and that was actually one of the things that I think is so different about Taxi Driver as well. You don't have these huge ensemble casts, right? Like Travis Bickle is in damn near every scene, and that's pretty that's pretty unusual, I think, for a Scorsese movie. And to have, I mean, it was him, and that is Taxi Driver. It's in the name, right? That is the character. Whereas, Casino, you've got 10 minutes of Robert De Niro, and he's talking you through something in the voiceover, and then it switches off to Joe Pesci, and then he goes off, and then you're with Joe Pesci for 10 to 20 minutes or however long. And Goodfellas is almost a similar thing, but yeah, with Taxi Driver, it's with the exception of a few scenes that involve Betsy and the Albert Brooks character, I can't remember his name. Um, with the exception of a few scenes there, I mean, it's just Travis all the time, and it's usually cinematography wise, like film, it's like planted on him, of just you don't get a ton of other stuff in the shot, and I just think that's so unique from Scorsese's filmography. I can't think of another movie quite like it from him. Again, haven't seen every single movie of his, but and I think that to say all of this is in a very good way. I think it's him stepping outside his comfort zone a little bit, especially this early on in his career. I mean, he hadn't even been directing for 10 years at this point, and to take on a movie like this, which is very difficult, is written by Paul Schrader, who himself has become a very prominent writer director, and he writes very difficult stuff, very very difficult, hard topics and things, and you get in that, and that's I just thought that was sort of the best thing. I think this is where when I talked about at the top of the show, where it hits a little bit different 20 years from now, or 20 years later. I don't think when I saw this in college, I didn't view it the same way. I was just kind of like, oh, this is weird for the sake of being weird, and I think I thought of a lot of David Lynch movies that way as well. But as you get older, you get a little, like you said, Nate, you get a little bit more well-read. You get a little bit, you watch more movies. You read more critics, more criticism about movies, and more understanding of them. And then the context of the filmmakers and what they were trying to do with a lot of their careers and everything. And so, having all that acquired knowledge for the last couple of decades and then rewatching it, it hit so much differently, and it was so much more of an impact. I was like, this movie is fantastic, and you can see why it's a classic, and it deserves that title. And I only have one major gripe with it. And I don't know, Steve, maybe you did something. Maybe you uncovered something in your research that can answer this question. But I want to talk about the ending.
Uh-oh.
Okay. So I mentioned this last week. Now I am of a particular taste that, generally speaking, with a lot of my, especially a lot of like the serious, more sort of darker movies, I tend to enjoy a bleaker and open-ended endings, right? So this movie almost felt like it had two endings, right? Like the one that almost looked like that's what they wanted to end it, and then it's something that feels to me like the studio came back and said, no, you got to add something here. When Travis goes on his murderous rampage, kills Iris's pimp, kills all these gangsters, goes in, the cops show up, and he's got his hand to his head and it's all covered in blood, and he mimes committing suicide, which he tried to do, but he was out of bullets. And then the movie just kind of pans away. Like, that is the ending, as far as I'm concerned, right? That should have been the ending. But then all of a sudden we get this sort of denouement moment where, okay, we saw these newspaper clippings and it's like, Travis Bickle is the hero. And it's just like, whoa, wait, what? And then you get this voiceover from the parents and they're like, thank you so much for rescuing
the parent.
Iris.
Yeah,
And,
that's pretty cringe. The parent voicemail, it is pretty cringe. I will give you that.
and then he goes and you see him back with the other taxi drivers, and he's got his hair back and everything looks fine. He's got just like barely visible scars from everything, and they're all like, hey Travis, you're the hero, blah blah blah. And then they're like, oh, you got a fare. And he goes in and it's Betsy from the earlier in the movie, and he takes her home, and she's like, oh, you're a hero now. And then she's like interested in him again, I guess. And so she's like, hey, do you want to come up to my apartment or whatever? And he's like, no, I don't. And then he just goes off. And so it's almost like, I don't know, like what they want us to think is like, okay, Travis becomes the hero. He's a better man now. He's cured. All his mental illness is done now. It's cured. And that part to me didn't quite feel earned. Maybe I'm misreading that, but I was ready for that movie to end when he's covered in blood there with the cops, and it didn't. And it really left me with a more sour taste in my mouth than I wanted to for that movie.
So one thing that I will say to maybe kind of defend it is there is a pretty long-standing theory about the ending of this film that he actually does die. And basically what you're seeing is kind of a dream, or some kind of purgatory or heaven that he's living in. Because I agree with you, Jeff, like him putting the finger gun to his head and pretending to shoot himself, like that's the end of the movie. It feels the parent voicemail, like it kind of cracks me up because it's like, okay, like Jodie Foster, 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute, does not have these perfectly normal parents that live upstate. Like, there's a reason that she is a preteen prostitute, and it probably comes from circumstances in her life that are less than favorable. Like, it's just very hard to me to get to the idea of, like, this preteen girl ran away from home, like, perfectly normal childhood, runs away from home to go be a prostitute in New York City. Like it feels a little too, like the parent voicemail is just like, this feels a little too convenient. Like
Completely agree.
she's been reunited with her parents and is back in school and is doing great.
Way to go, Travis.
Yeah, way to go. You say that this girl is a 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute. just got robbed from her perfectly normal childhood and upbringing to be on the rough streets of New York, and now he's put her back where she's supposed to be. It feels very convenient, and that's
And
kind of why I do. I mean, I buy a little bit into the theory that maybe it's a dream because it just feels so convenient. But I don't know.
yeah, and the one gangster that he kills that just randomly happens to be around at that time is like the most wanted gangster in New York. Also another just massive, you know, occurrence of convenience that I'm just like, and I've read about this whole dream theory and that sort of a thing, and I'm not buying that just because you know, that's just nothing I've seen from Martin Scorsese either before or since this movie, with the possible exception of Shutter Island. Um, I would not think that that's a route that Scorsese would ever want to go down, let alone something he actually does in this case. So I have a hard time believing that was the intention there. Um, Again, it feels to me like the studio was like, "This is too bleak. You got to have something happier here." Steve, what do you got for us?
So I'll cut right to it. There's nothing definitive in any of the books here that I've got by or about Scorsese, but I will leave you with a few thoughts here on this is from Scorsese on Scorsese. These are his words. He said, "When I made it, I didn't intend to have the audience react with the feeling of, yes, let's do it, let's go out and kill. The idea was to create a violent catharsis so that they'd find themselves saying, yes, kill, and then afterwards realize, my God, no, that was the instinct I went with. But it's scary to hear what happens with the audience because people really sometimes get really excited about the final end." But then he says, all around the world, people have told me this. He said, a young man in China told him, I'm very lonely. And Scorsese says, yes, basically we all are. And then, what do I do with the loneliness? The guy said. He said, very often I try to put it into the work. A few days later, he came back and told me, I tried putting it into the work, but it doesn't go away. I replied, no, it doesn't go away. There's no magic cure. And he says, I wanted the violence at the end to be as if Travis had to keep killing all of these people in order to stop once and for all. So to me, that makes me think that like there was no way that he was ever going to succeed, and he died. Like that, those are a dying man's dreams. Like that's how I interpret all of that.
That's so bizarre that he wouldn't. That there's all these years.
Now, I mean, this book was like, I don't think it's been updated for 15 years or so. So maybe he's given an interview since.
I mean, that's still 30 years later, and there's no like definitive, oh, it was a dream or whatever. Especially because like, and the same goes for Paul Schrader, right? Like, I've never seen anything from him, any movies written or directed by him that make me think he's of the "it was all a dream" sort of.
I don't think it's a dream so much as I think it's his dying.
I mean, how different is that? Dying wish, right? Like it's
well, sure. Well, okay.
I mean, it's just dream.
When we
in
say
the sense
dream,
that,
by the way,
that it's not a reality is what I'm saying.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. So
when we
whether
say
it's a
dream,
dream
though,
or,
like
or
the word dream, I think is very important in this context because Scorsese used that word to describe what he intended to make the movie feel like. He wanted the movie to feel like a dream, the entire thing. So I think that's interesting that we've used that word we've stumbled upon that word to describe this final bit. I don't know.
Interesting. But that was the only fault I had with the movie. I just, that whole final bit, I didn't feel like that was earned or that it felt good, and that could be also with I mean, this is the 50-year anniversary, right, of that movie. It's 1974. So, 50 years later, we've got a lot more knowledge about mental health and just the way of the world and all that sort of thing. So it's very possible that it could just be my own benefit of having of the collective society having 50 years of hindsight. So maybe that hit differently in 74. Maybe it was still as horrific in 1974. That I can't really speak to, obviously, but that's how I feel today.
I want to find this out. Maybe we'll edit this in if we figure it out here in the next couple of minutes. But
Yeah, but I thought, one of the things that was interesting, and there's actually, we hadn't really touched on this yet, but about Travis in particular, with, so there are a couple things that I think they're when Scorsese, who's battles with male rage and male toxicity, and that's very much a through line in a lot of his movies. Sort of this and Raging Bull are kind of the two major touch points, I think, for those in his filmography. Now, it's interesting because like when he first comes in, Travis, to the campaign place, he starts talking to Betsy, and then Albert Brooks's character is in the table behind, and he's pretending to talk to somebody else or whatever, or give some papers or whatever, but he keeps looking over at her, and then Travis keeps looking up at him, right, and he keeps seeing him, and he knows what's going on here. He knows this guy's being protective, and it's this sort of like, for lack of a better term, a dick measuring contest right there in the middle, right, of this, and this sort of male possessiveness of women, and this just that idea itself, along with what we then see, when Travis goes on a couple dates with Betsy, and how, especially with him taking her to the porno theater, the he sort of projects some of himself onto her, right, in a way that was reminiscent, I think, of She's Gotta Have It from Spike Lee, which we talked about a couple weeks ago, where all the characters, all the men in that movie were projecting themselves and projecting their wants and desires onto Nola. And I think it was kind of similar in this, where Travis was trying to project some of that, some of his desires that he has that are born from his loneliness, onto her, and she's like, whoa, what the fuck, man, this is weird, what are you doing? And it's this sort of shock to his system. And just as, eventually when she finally like gives him the rebuttal, to his face, and she's just like, I don't want to see you anymore, you're weird. And then he starts like cussing her out, calling her names, doing all this stuff. And it just reminds me, you go on the internet, you see all these screenshots and stuff people post from terrible interactions from people that they've dated or met through dating sites, and they'll, somebody will come on, and some man will talk to this woman and say, oh, you're so beautiful, we should meet up or whatever, and she's like, no thanks, I just don't think that we would vibe based on your profile or whatever. And then the man instantly turns, and it's just like, well, you're ugly anyway, I didn't want to go out on a date with you. And it's like, well, you just asked me out, what are you talking about? It feels, it's very much like that, 50 years later, and we're still dealing with this kind of stuff where, a man is clearly attracted to a woman, clearly wants this to happen, and then as soon as she denies him what he wants, then Travis immediately snaps, and it's just like, well, fuck you, you're all, he calls her all these names, and it's just like that sort of just raw male toxicity, male rage, etc. It was, again, it's very much a through line in Scorsese's movies, but this one in particular, I think it just, and you used this word earlier, Nate, of just how raw it is, and the whole movie is that way, and that's what it makes it sort of this uncomfortable way. Um, and I just thought, that was one of my favorite aspects of it. It's something where it's just, it might be a little bit ahead of its time. I think the ending sort of undercuts a little bit of it, and doesn't allow, and this goes back to what I've been talking about since, where sometimes Scorsese is good with just presenting the issue and not necessarily giving a direction for it. But he very much presents it, and it's very, very raw and very powerful the way it all is, and again, a little bit ahead of its time, and sort of examining this idea of the male ego. And like you said, Nate, they eventually even talk about it, and this is sort of one of the most, in depth, that I think I can recall from a Scorsese movie, where you really get two male characters talking about their own mental health. And of course, it doesn't help, but it's interesting nonetheless. And so I thought those were some of the more, um, the things that grabbed me the most, some of the more powerful things about the movie.
Well, like I said, almost from the very beginning, it was going to be very hard to bury the lead. Um, I'll start tonight as the Spike Lee guy and say my vote is absolutely for Taxi Driver. And I think just the level of analysis we've given to Taxi Driver, I think, is indicative of it's just too important. I actually wrote in my notes that I literally wrote, "You talking to me? Too iconic not to get my vote." This is how I wrote that. I just don't think you can vote against this movie in this particular week. I think that last week when we looked at Goodfellas and Do the Right Thing, I had this very impassioned remark about Do the Right Thing and how that was Spike Lee had to make that film and that kind of made it more important and it was more of like a document than it was even sort of a movie for entertainment. But I was doing that because I thought both those movies were of equal weight. I think they're both really, really, really great movies. I just do not think Summer of Sam is a great movie. I think there's a great movie in it somewhere. I think it has good moments, but it's not a great movie. And Taxi Driver is, by any estimation, a fantastic piece of filmmaking that has endured 50 years later and is still hitting on themes that we're talking about. So, my vote this week is as the Spike Lee guy, I will tell you my vote this week is absolutely Taxi Driver.
Yeah, and as the Martin Scorsese guy, I'll say that gets my vote as well. I knew this was going to be a tough week for anything. I was like, maybe seeing Summer of Sam after all these years, maybe it could change my mind if something, but no, it didn't. And producer Brandon did a little online sleuthing while we were talking about it, and he says both Schrader and Scorsese insist that the ending is not a dream and that Travis does indeed live. And the idea from a New Yorker review posits that he being Travis is not necessarily cured, but that the city is crazier than he is. So maybe he looks cured compared to how crazy we now realize the city is. So that's an interesting angle as well. But yeah, my vote goes to Taxi Driver, and I seeing it all those years ago, I don't think it hit me, and I don't think that I appreciated how different of a lane this was for Scorsese to tackle, even though it's got a lot of the same themes and a lot of the similar things, but just the structure of the movie itself. And I just think it really pays off. And De Niro is just incredible. And I mean, all the actors are amazing. And Betsy and how she does it. I mean, Jodie Foster, she not only did she play a 12-and-a-half-year-old prostitute, she was 12 and a half years old. And she's given that performance. Because I looked it up, I was like, surely she had to be like 17 or something. But no, she was actually 12 years old when she made that movie. And like a fantastic performance from her. And you see why she became, the legend that she is today. So yeah, it's real hard. Even though I think I liked Summer of Sam more than maybe I would have years ago, and I did like John Leguizamo's performance quite a bit, and Mira Sorvino. I just think, I mean, Taxi Driver. How do you? It's hard to beat that. So made it easy for you this week, Steve.
Yeah, I've got nothing earth-shattering or groundbreaking to say that you two haven't said. I enjoyed Summer of Sam far more than I thought I would, and there is a really, really good movie in there. Almost, like I said earlier, an elite movie, I think. But it's just not there. There's too much. It's too convoluted. There's too many plot lines. Not too many plot lines, but it tried to do too much, and it betrays itself, as you said, Jeff. And Taxi Driver is a classic for good reason. Robert De Niro is amazing. Scorsese comes into his own. It's one of the best films of all time.
And it's so consistent. Like it just through the whole movie, the pacing is very deliberate and it's perfect for the type of movie that it's in, and then up to the climax that it nails perfectly and everything. Like, again, except for that last final couple minutes there in the ending, that it just and everything else was.
I'm gonna choose to believe those are the delusions of a dying man. I don't care what Marty Scorsese and Paul Schrader think. Once the art is released into the world, it is no longer theirs to determine.
Hey, that is within your right, for sure.
I think it's actually what it really is. It's what David Berkowitz is imagining. He is getting the public, the adoration of the public, as he is looking out the window of the police car as he's being driven to the police station because he's so fucked up in the head. He thinks that he is some sort of hero. That's what I think's going on.
It is
It's a
kind of
final
bizarre that
little
sort
crossover.
of similarity between Berkowitz and Travis. And
It's-
producer Brandon is talking about bringing up a lot of similarities with the Joker
yeah, the
movie,
police car. Yeah,
which I have heard that there were a lot of Scorsese references. I have not seen that movie, so I can't.
Joker has a
It's
lot
just
of. Go ahead.
literally just imagine the movie Taxi Driver, except it's a DC Comics movie and Travis is the Joker. Like that's basically the movie.
That's pretty much what I've heard, with a little bit of King of
King
Comedy
of comedy. Yeah.
thrown in. Yeah,
Yeah, with a little bit of King of Comedy, and he doesn't drive a taxi, but like that's it.
yeah.
Like
And even Robert De Niro is in the movie.
yes,
the
Robert
Joker.
De Niro's in the movie. Yeah, it's very similar thematically.
So yeah, well, that wraps up this week. So next week we'll be on episode 4, which is our sports week, sports ball week, we can call it. We'll be talking about He Got Game from Spike Lee and Raging Bull from Martin Scorsese. So be another interesting week. Raging Bull, very famous. He Got Game. That was sort of an interesting one from Spike Lee. One of the early kind of movies where I think in the early '90s when we first kind of started seeing a huge crossover between athletes and acting, and not it had happened before, but Michael Jordan, Space Jam, Ray Allen was in He Got Game, etc. So it's kind of an interesting time for athletes in movies, and He Got Game really dived into that.
Dove.
So yeah, it'll be interesting, and that's another movie I haven't seen in a long time.
I
Raging
haven't
Bull,
seen
I've
either
seen.
of these movies. I've not seen Raging Bull.
I'm excited for you to
My
see Raging Bull.
my tease for next week, which I will absolutely talk about, one of these movies. You can probably figure out which one, maybe. One of these movies has one of my all-time favorite movie lines, which I will reveal next week. You will sit on the edge of your seat. Our
Oh, I
tens
can't
of
wait.
listeners will sit on the edge of their seats waiting.
I thought you were gonna tease a hot take like I had about
Hot
Goodfellas.
takes. I got a hot take
No,
for you for this week.
oh yeah, hit us with the hot take this week.
Let me hear it.
Shockingly, based on this week's movies, it is not 100% failure rate on taking a date to a porno theater for a first date. Think about it. Adrian Brody's character takes Ruby to a sort of a porno theater.
That's a
and
good
it
point.
worked out. It
That's a
worked
good
out.
point.
Look at that. 50-50.
Look at that. Boom.
You got a chance.
Hey, there we are.
That's my hot take. I wanted to work that in.
There we go.
There was one more comparison that I had.
It is a sufficiently hot take. So that
It's
brings our
very
tally.
much it's very much a 60% of the time it works every time. kind of scenario.
There you go. I love it. Yes. So yeah, that brings our tally. Spike Lee 2, Martin Scorsese 1 after 3 weeks. And we'll be back next week again, Sports Ball Week, with.
What you say that? That's what people say when they don't like real sports. We like sports. We all like sports here.
We love sports. Yeah, I love sports. I don't know. I was thinking we initially had it as Athlete Week, but I was trying to think of a more clever
feats
name.
of strength, feats of
it must be the shoes week. That gives us
like
Spike
that.
Lee. But that's it. It's done. There it is. Must be the shoes week for athletes. So Raging Bull and He Got Game. If you're watching along out there in podcast land as we listen to it, watch those, and then come join us next week as we'll have another good show for you. So until then, thank you all so much for stopping by, and we'll see you next time.
And we're clear.
Yay. All right.
Good show, I say.
Yay.
So that's 3. Do we want to post? We want one more. What do we got going on?
I was thinking we get like 5 in. And the only reason I say, and I'm not trying to, if you, I think definitely one more at least. The only reason I say that is because I just know I'm thinking